Can Benjamin Netanyahu push ahead with his threat to annex the Jordan Valley? The Israeli Prime Minister's pledged he will if re-elected. So, is it an election ploy to woo voters? And what will the outcome be? This is Inside Story. Hello, I'm Imran Khan. Welcome to the programme. It's being called an act of aggression that could lead to war. But that hasn't deterred Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu from promising to annex large parts of the occupied West Bank if he wins next week's snap election. Netanyahu is fighting for his political career after an inconclusive vote in April. And he says Israel will apply Israeli sovereignty to the Jordan Valley and the northern Dead Sea immediately if he secures a fifth term. The Jordan Valley and the northern Dead Sea make up 30% of the occupied West Bank. Approximately 65,000 Palestinians and 11,000 Israelis living in illegal settlements reside in that area. The main Palestinian city is Jericho, and that has about 28 villages and some Bedouin communities. Under Netanyahu's plans, Jericho would largely be cut off from the rest of the West Bank. Annexation would also encircle any future Palestinian state. There's a lot to get into with our guests, but first, Nida Ibrahim has more from the Jordan Valley.
We're standing in Ras Al-Ouja village in the Jordan Valley. The Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu says he wants to annex this area. He doesn't want to annex that area over there, Jericho and Al-Ouja, because he says he wants to complete and carry out his plan without annexing any single Palestinian. But there are Palestinians here, Bedouin communities. We've spoken to some of them, and they believe that what Netanyahu is saying is part of his elections campaign.
Every time they have Israeli elections, they do it at the expense of the Palestinian people. Netanyahu says, I want to annex the Jordan Valley, so Israelis will vote for him, not more.
How many times will they evict us? Palestinians have been displaced several times already. There's no place else for us to go.
The Jordan Valley makes up 1/3 of the occupied West Bank. It's already under Israeli military occupation, and Palestinians see it as an integral part of their future Palestinian state. Now, this is under threat. This is why many Palestinian officials have been voicing concerns against Netanyahu's remark. They are saying that Netanyahu is disregarding international law only for him to win more votes. They're calling it an act of ethnic cleansing, stealing Palestinian land and killing any opportunity for a two-state solution.
Let's bring in our panel. Joining us from West Jerusalem, Mitchell Barak, CEO of Kivon Global Research and former advisor to Israeli President Shimon Peres. And from Ramallah, Mustafa Barghouti, Secretary General of the Palestinian National Initiative and former Palestinian Information Minister. And from Washington, D.C., on Skype, Moeen Rabbani, co-editor of Jaraliyah, an online magazine focusing on Middle East politics and culture. Welcome you all to the programme. Let me start with Mitchell Barak in West Jerusalem first. The annexation, is this electioneering chutzpah or a deadly serious plan?
Well, that's a great word, chutzpah. I mean, I really can't believe that you've taken his declaration so seriously, that you're dedicating a whole show to it. His campaign strategy so far has been to scare everyone, scare the Israeli public, scare the Palestinians, scare the world, and get people to vote. And whatever it is, he finds something. And if it's not the thunder, then the lightning will get you. And if it's not the lightning, it's the hailstorms, and it's the earthquakes, and it's some catastrophe that's going to take place. And that's what he's doing. You cannot take anything that he says seriously during this election period, especially the last week.
Unfortunately, we have to take him seriously. Let's be honest. There's the issue of the Golden Heights. There's the move of the embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem. There is a number of things that have happened. It's not without the bounds of imagination that he might well be serious about this. I think we do have to take him seriously. Let's bring in Mustafa Barghouti in Ramallah. Do you take the Israeli leader seriously when he says he might annex the West Bank or the Jordan Valley?
I do not agree with what was said. I think it's very serious, it's very dangerous, and it's part of a process. which is led by Netanyahu, but it is actually reflecting the actual behavior and policy of the Zionist movement in Israel. Let's talk about realities and facts. An unprecedented level of expansion of Israeli illegal settlements in the occupied territories. Agreement between Netanyahu and his government and Trump's team, which seems to be working for Netanyahu more than working for Trump, to implement his ideas. Recognition of Jerusalem as a capital of Israel, recognition of the annexation of the Golan Heights, an attack on UNRWA and cut of funding from Palestinian Authority and United Nations Relief and Work Agency, an actual plan to liquidate the Palestinian refugee rights, and an actual change in the American policy, which stopped supporting the two-state solution and now is talking about self-governing authority under a system of apartheid. On the ground, what we see is a full-fledged system of apartheid. And frankly speaking, I do not see much differences between Gantz and Netanyahu. They all are against the establishment of a Palestinian state. They are all for continuation of occupation, and they both are participating in consolidating a system of apartheid. So no, I take this very seriously. Shakid also is speaking about annexation not only of Jordan Valley, but of the whole area of sea. And I believe this is a trend that is going on factually to consolidate apartheid and kill the option of two-state solution.
Mitchell, we are hearing that the Palestinians, and not just from Mustafa Barghouti, but the Palestinians are taking this very seriously. But there's another side to this as well. Now that Netanyahu has actually made this announcement, he's playing to his right-wing supporters, those people that will come out and vote for him. After the election, if he wins, they're going to hold him to this announcement. They're going to want to see it done. And if he can't give it to them, there may well be another political crisis in Israel, surely.
No, because the only way that Netanyahu has a real path to government, and I think he's in real danger now, and he was even on the radio today saying, according to his internal polls, he's going to lose, which is another scare tactic, another thing that he's telling people. What's probably going to happen is there's going to be some kind of unity government after the election, which includes the Likud or pieces of the Likud without Netanyahu, and the blue and white party of Benny Gantz, and the Lieberman party. This will be one of the first things that's taken off the table. Because as Mr. Barghouti said, you know, the facts on the ground are such that it's not going to really change anything. Meaning there are communities and settlements there. It's regular life there. Nothing's going to really change. So why do you need this change in legal status? I think the only thing that we have to look for is what is the Trump peace plan going to say? Meaning, is this in the Trump peace plan? And the other thing that is not mentioned, and maybe Mr. Barghouti or the other guests can mention that, is you know, there hasn't really been a partner on the Palestinian side during the time that Netanyahu's been in office. Now, he isn't the greatest, pursuer of peace and looking to settle the Palestinian issue. At the same time, you know, we are having a double election in 1 year. It would be nice if the Palestinian people could vote too, as President Abbas is entering his, 12th year of his 4-year term. So there isn't a partner on the other side. So I think a lot of Israelis are hopeful that there will be some kind of change here in Israel because he's been already a decade now in office. And then on the Palestinian side, if things could be shaken up too, there may be a chance to come to some kind of agreement, especially with the Trump administration. Trump likes to shake things up. He's got a plan he's working on for 2 years. And you know what? I think his patience is also running out with Israel and specifically with Netanyahu. And he's going to want to do something to show, especially now before the election. He's got to show some progress in the Middle East, in Israel, with the Palestinians. He's given Israel a lot of concessions for free. And as we know, there's no such thing as a free kosher lunch. Someone's going to have to pay for it, and we're going to have to pay for it after the election. And that could be to the benefit of the Palestinians.
Let's bring in Moin Rabbani here from Washington, D.C. You've heard our other two guests there. The Palestinians clearly taking this latest announcement very seriously. Mitchell Barak saying, well, actually, this is just electioneering. What are your thoughts? Do you think that this is the death of the two-state solution and it's now time to really take a look at alternatives?
Well, it is an election gimmick in the sense that Netanyahu is saying this annexation won't happen unless you vote for me and I form the next government. And if you don't, nothing will change. But I fully agree with Dr. Barghouti that it also reflects a much deeper agenda. It's, in a sense, the logical culmination of half a century of Israeli occupation and expanding colonization of the West Bank. And I think the key issue here is that Israeli leaders see the period between the conclusion of the Israeli elections next week and the American presidential elections next year as a golden opportunity that may not be repeated to unilaterally seek to resolve core issues of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict in close coordination with Washington. In terms of the final part of your question, I mean, Israel has always wanted the two-state settlement to be off the table. And my response would be that this makes it that much more difficult. It doesn't take anything off the table just because Israel wants it off the table. The key issue here, I think, is that when it comes to these actions in the occupied territories, Israel has, for all intents and purposes, been acting with impunity for the past half century. And the key issue now is, will the international community continue to give Israel at most a slap on the wrist, look the other way, or will it confront Israel with serious, meaningful consequences for its conduct?
Mustafa Barghouti in Ramallah, I mean, what are the Palestinians' options right now? What can you do?
Well, let me first say that tomorrow will be the 26th anniversary of Oslo illusion. I don't call it an agreement, I call it an illusion. It was a trap that Palestinians fell in, and Israel used the time very well to consolidate settlement expansion, occupation, and the system of apartheid. I do not see a difference. I don't see any perspective for a peace process as long as the balance of power between us and Israel is so skewed in the interest of this Israeli trend, which is right-wing trend. I don't see a peace camp in Israel. There is no peace camp in Israel which can engage in a real fruitful process. And let me put it clearly. What is the difference between Gantz, Netanyahu, and Lieberman on the issue of Jerusalem? None. What is the difference between Netanyahu, Gantz, and Lieberman on the issue of removing settlements? None. What is the difference between the three of them and the issue of Palestinian statehood? Also none. They're all against separation of Jerusalem. They're all against removing settlements. They're all against Palestinian state. And in that sense, I don't see a peace camp in Israel. That's why I think what we witnessed today and the Israeli announcement, Likud's announcement, Shakid's announcement is about declaring the death of the so-called two-state solution. What could change the situation? Only two things: Palestinian resistance to this plan and international sanctions on Israel. I don't see sanctions coming in. I see growing boycott, divestment sanctions at the public level, at the grassroots level. But governments of the world only issue condemnation and statements, which mean nothing. Unless there are acts of punishment, unless Israel knows that there will be punitive acts against violation of international law, this course will not change. But that does not leave Palestinians without an option. I believe what we should do is three things. First of all, immediate end of internal Palestinian division. A unified Palestinian leadership as soon as possible. Second, ending the illusion of Oslo and declaring a new alternative Palestinian strategy, which is based on popular nonviolent resistance, as well as boycott, divestment, sanctions campaign, and helping Palestinians steadfast and stay on this ground, because we all know, the Israelis know, that our numbers here in Palestine is equal to the number of Israeli Jewish people. And that is the main obstacle to the Zionist plan. Finally, I must say we should declare as Palestinians that if you kill the two-states option, which is happening, we will demand one-state solution. One state with full democratic rights for everybody, from the river to the sea. They don't want two states? Okay, we'll fight against apartheid. I know it will take a long time, but that's the only course we have. We have to fight for freedom. We have to struggle for justice. We have to struggle for real peace, for a lasting peace that can only happen on the basis of equality between the both people.
Let's bring in Mitchell Barak. When Israelis hear somebody like Mustafa Barghouti speaking that way, saying, actually, the two-state solution is dead, we need to look at real alternatives, we need a one-state solution, that will scare a lot of people in Israel. But clearly, what you've said and what you have been saying is that fear works for Netanyahu. Is this something that he's using to his advantage?
Well, you know, first of all, I have to disagree with something Dr. Barghouti said. He says there's no difference between Netanyahu, Gantz, and Lieberman, but there's a very big difference because Netanyahu campaigned in 1996 that he would cancel the Oslo Accords. He didn't. He was the one who implemented the Oslo Accords, okay? He was the one that withdrew from Hebron, okay, against the wishes of the Israeli people. He was the one that enforced the Oslo Accords in the beginning when he was prime minister. When he took over as prime minister a decade ago, he gave the speech in Bar Ilan supporting a two-state solution. I didn't hear Gantz or Lieberman do that. He was the finance minister up until the disengagement, 1 month before the disengagement. He made sure all the money was there to do that. So of any of the people, Netanyahu is the most liberal. Netanyahu has done more for a two-state solution. Netanyahu does more than any of the ones.
I'm sorry. I can't let you get. I can't let you say that with impunity, Mitchell. He has built more settlements that are illegal under international law than any other Israeli leader, and he hasn't really kick-started the peace process.
I believe that is not correct.
I actually think it is, but let's...
There was a listing of which prime ministers have built more settlements.
He declared his plan in '94 to kill Oslo.
He is not the most settlement prime minister.
Well, let's bring in Mr. Barghouti. Mr. reply to what Mitchell Barg just said.
I totally disagree with what was said. Netanyahu personally planned the death of Oslo Agreement. He planned the death of two-state solution. All you need to do is to go back and read his book, which he issued in 1994, A Place Under the Sun, in which he said he's going to fight to end the possibility of a Palestinian state, that West Bank is Judea and Samaria, that he will work for building settlements. He aggravated the Israeli public to assassinate Yitzhak Rabin. He was behind that. And he's the one who blocked the implementation of Oslo Agreement. And he and Sharon later did everything they could to bury it. He is the one who built so many settlements, and not only him, of course, Sharon participated in that. Every Israeli leader did that. And that's why I say there is no difference between Gantz and Netanyahu. In reality, they're all representing one Zionist movement that believes that the whole of Palestine is Jewish. And that's why they passed the Jewish state law. Under Netanyahu, what is the Jewish state law? It's about racism. It's about saying that Palestinians has no right to be in this land. This man has contributed and established and consolidated not only occupation, but a system of apartheid that is trying to kill any opportunity for peace, any opportunity for future Palestinian state. That is the reality. If there is a man who killed Oslo more than anybody else, it's Netanyahu.
Let me bring in Moin Rabbani here from Washington, D.C. You've heard our other two guests. Agreement is nowhere near, or even a consensus, in fact, between them. What is left for the Israeli-Palestinian peace process? They don't seem to have an honest broker in the US. The EU seems to be failing when it comes to all of this, international organizations. There doesn't seem to be any light on the horizon. Or am I being very pessimistic there?
Well, let me first start by pointing out regarding the differences between the main Israeli leaders contesting next week's election. The response of blue and white leader Benny Gantz to Netanyahu's annexation proposal was to accuse Netanyahu of stealing his ideas. So that perhaps gives an indication of how close the mainstream Israeli leaders are, or the leaders who currently represent the Israeli mainstream, on issues when it comes to the Palestinians. I would argue there wasn't a meaningful peace process from the outset. Oslo was never about ending the Israeli occupation of the West Bank and the Gaza Strip and implementing Palestinian self-determination through Palestinian statehood and a just resolution of the refugee question. Oslo was a way to get around that international consensus and a mechanism through which Israel could reconfigure its relations with the Palestinians in the aftermath of the first Intifada, because Israeli leadership came to the conclusion that the status quo was untenable. But it was simply to continue the occupation through different means, and that's the real issue. I think if we're going to have a meaningful peace process, I think the last 25 years have demonstrated well beyond any reasonable or unreasonable doubt that Israel is incapable of making the kinds of compromises that are necessary for a durable Israeli-Palestinian peace, and that the ball is therefore very much in the court of the international community to take the necessary measures. And I think they would have to be spurred by Palestinian actions to demonstrate that the status quo that was established by Oslo is as untenable as a status quo that we had in the late 1980s and early 1990s. So, I mean, it's a very bleak horizon we're looking at. But I think over the longer term, it can be successfully challenged.
Let me bring in Mitchell Barak here. We are running out of time, but I do want to ask you this question. You've heard Mustafa Barghouti speaking in Ramallah. You've heard our guest in Washington, D.C., Moin Rabbani. Do you still believe that this is electioneering chutzpah from Netanyahu and that actually the Palestinians shouldn't worry about this announcement? And once, the election is over and done with, everything will go back to normal, for want of a better word?
I mean, where do you think Netanyahu is today? He had to go to Russia 5 days before the election to meet with President Putin. Is there something that is so pressing right now that is urgent to leave the country during an election campaign? No. He's actually going out there for the photo op so that the Russian voters can see that he is, as he says, in a different league. He was last week with Boris Johnson in the United Kingdom, the prime minister there. Today, he's with the Russian president. It's just electioneering, meaning, and he never is held to these standards of what he said during the election, and he'll retract it. And the question that has been asked by many people, Mr. Netanyahu, you've been prime minister for 10 years. Why didn't you extend Israeli law before that? Why didn't you extend it anywhere on the West Bank? Through the settlement blocks of Ariel, of Gush Etzion, of Ma'ale Adumim. Why haven't you done that? Why did you wait for the last election to declare that you were going to do it, but in a whole decade you haven't done it? And the reason he hasn't done it is because he doesn't necessarily have intention to do it. He realizes that to take a unilateral step like that is something that has to, have a real reason to do. He also knows the Trump plan is coming out, and this is just electioneering. I really don't think we're going to see that anything concrete take place. Again, it's going to depend on where he comes out in the election, but I wouldn't take too much seriousness. And even whoever's elected, whether it's Netanyahu or Gantz, the likelihood is it's not going to be a hardcore right of center government. And we may see some real change in the Middle East, especially now that Trump is going to look to be reelected.
We are running out of time, and I do want to bring Mustafa Barghouti in to respond to you, Mitchell Barak. Mustafa, is there anything that you've heard from our guest in Ramallah that may have helped you change your mind, or are you convinced that it's still the same?
Again, unfortunately, I have to say I totally disagree with Mr. Barak. Totally. Because actually what Netanyahu is doing is step by step annexing the West Bank. Step by step separating completely Gaza from the rest of Palestinian territories. What he is doing is implementing his original strategic plan, and it's not his plan only. I repeat, it's a plan of a whole movement that is supporting him. That's why what he says is very dangerous. And let me say, maybe we used to talk about status quo before, but there is no status quo anymore. Actually, there is a change that takes place every day with every building of a new settlement, with the segregated roads that did not exist even during the apartheid system in South Africa. What we've seen during the last 15 years, especially under Netanyahu, is the full and total consolidation of apartheid, a system of racial discrimination against Palestinians, a system that every Israeli should be ashamed of, a system that has to be fought back at, and a system that has to be changed. There can be no peace, no prosperity, and no good future for both Israelis and Palestinians without ending this system of apartheid, without allowing Palestinians to have total equality and total freedom.
I'm afraid we are out of time. I just want to thank all our guests, Mitchell Barak, Mustafa Barghouti and Moin Rabbani, and thank you too for watching. You can see the programme again anytime by visiting our website, aljazeera.com. And for further discussion, go to our Facebook page. That's facebook.com/AJ Inside Story. And you can also join the conversation on Twitter. Our handle is @AJ Inside Story. From me, Imran Khan, and the whole team here, bye for now.